reply burst hit my console at 0314 station time, and the first thing I noticed was the call sign. I had been on the comms rail for 6 years. I knew every flag prefix in the Sovereign Reaches emergency dispatch network. I knew the 7-character header that meant a reach relief station was acknowledging receipt. I knew the 4-digit suffix that tagged a message as originating from Corridor Command, from the deep watch buoys we'd seated along the Edda approach, or from one of the 43 patrol frigates, including ours, that worked the outer transit lanes. 6 years on the rail meant I could read a header the way a navigator reads a star chart, not by thinking, but by the small wrongness that settles in the chest when something is not where it should be. This header had that wrongness. I read it twice, which I don't usually do. The origin flag was not reach standard. The prefix was not any of the 7 formats I knew. Frequency band was in the range we used for interoperability protocols. The old handshake layer that predated the Reach's current comms, architecture by nearly a century, but the encoding signature inside it was nothing I recognized. It was not one of ours. I sat with that for 4 seconds, which is a long time when your ship is venting trace atmosphere from a breach in the secondary hull, and your drive, core has been running on emergency reserve since the collision 2 hours ago. Then I ran the origin flag through the lookup table. The lookup table came back with a result. The result said, Earth. I read that once and I did not read it again, because reading it again would not have changed what it said. I sat very still for a moment with the comms rail humming under my hands and the soft, red warning light washing across my console from the drive core monitor behind me, and I thought about the distress call we had filed at 0252, 22 minutes ago, when our navigation officer had transmitted our position and our emergency status to the Reach Relief Station at Sector Edda 7. I thought about how long 22 minutes was. I thought about what could answer a distress call in 22 minutes from a position that was not the relief station we had filed it to. Then I pulled the transmission log for the outgoing distress burst at 0252, and I looked at the sector coordinate in the emergency header. The sector coordinate for the Edda 7 relief station was 44 north, 227 east, Corridor 9. The sector coordinate in our outgoing burst was 44 north, 272 east, Corridor 9. 2 digits transposed. I looked at that for a long time. 2 and the 7. Sitting in the wrong order in the middle of a field I had confirmed before transmission, that our navigation officer had confirmed before transmission, that the automated pre-send check had run against our position log and passed because our position log had the same transposition that our navigation officer had keyed in when the ship was shaking itself apart, and the emergency lighting was flashing, and there was a 17-centimeter breach in the secondary hull, 2 compartments aft. The automated check had compared the coordinate to our own log. Our log was wrong. The check had passed. The burst had gone to 44 north, 272 east. I didn't know at that moment what was at 44 north, 272 east, Corridor 9. I ran it through the sector registry while the Earth reply sat on my console, flagged and waiting. The sector registry came back. It said, Deep Watch Post Edda Corridor Station, established 94 years prior under the Edda Corridor Interoperability Memorandum. Article 11. A passive listening post maintained by Earth as part of the old transit lane monitoring network, a relic of the era before the Reach had extended its own sensor grid far enough to make Earth's presence in the corridor unnecessary. Unnecessary but not decommissioned. Still there, still listening. Our distress burst had hit it at 0254. Earth had taken 18 minutes to compose and transmit a reply. I sat with all of that for another 3 seconds. Then I opened the channel to the captain's station. Captain Dren Solik was not in her chair when I called her. She was in the forward medical bay. She had been since the collision, because the collision had opened a pressure seal on deck 2. And the pressure seal had done what pressure seals do when they open unexpectedly, which was to introduce a significant amount of kinetic energy to everything in its immediate vicinity, including the captain's left arm and the upper portion of her left side. The ship's medic had stabilized her. She was functional. She was not, by any clinical measure, comfortable. She answered my call on the 3rd tone. Tall. Her voice was flat and careful. The voice of someone managing pain by keeping everything very level. Tell me the drive core hasn't crossed the threshold. No, sir. Drive core is still holding at emergency reserve. We have time, I paused. I have a reply to our distress transmission. A short silence. Heard her breathe. 7. No, sir. Another silence, longer this time. Tal. Who answered, I told her. I told her about the header, about the sector registry, about the coordinate transposition. I read her both coordinates, the one we had intended to file, and the one we had actually filed, and I let the silence after that do the work that words couldn't quite manage. She did not say anything for a long time. When she spoke, she said, "What does the reply contain?" "I haven't opened it yet, sir. I wanted to inform you first." "Open it." I opened it. The reply was text only, in the Reach standard script. They had encoded it in our format, which meant they had our format on file, which was its own small note of strangeness that I filed away for later. It was not long. It ran to 4 paragraphs. The first paragraph identified the sender, Earth Deep Watch Station Ed Corridor, operating under the EDA Corridor Interoperability Memorandum, Article 11, Section 4, authorized Earth's listening posts to acknowledge receipt of distress signals from any registered vessel in the corridor, regardless of the signal's intended recipient, and to transmit that acknowledgement to the vessel of origin. The second paragraph confirmed that they had received our distress burst at 0254, that they had logged our position and our stated emergency status, drive core on emergency reserve, secondary hull breach, complement 340, and that they had cross-referenced our status against their records. The third paragraph said, "We are transmitting a technical data package under separate cover. Our records include documentation from the Earth vessel Caro's Landing, which sustained an equivalent drive core emergency in this corridor 31 years ago. Failure mode, you describe. Thermal runaway in the secondary magnetic containment array, initiated by collision-induced microfracture in the field coil housing, matches our documentation precisely. 2. The data package includes the full engineering record of the Caro's Landing response, including the field coil bypass procedure that arrested thermal progression and held the drive core stable for 11 hours until relief arrived. This procedure requires components you carry as standard equipment. It does not require external assistance. Transmission to follow," the fourth paragraph said. "We have also notified the Reach Relief Station at Sector ETA 7 of your actual position and status. Their estimated arrival is 6 hours, 14 minutes. We have forwarded your distress coordinates, corrected, and then it ended. No flourish. No expression of sympathy or solidarity. No mention of the coordinate error. No acknowledgement of the strangeness of the situation. Just the 4 paragraphs, and then the transmission header closing out. I read it to Captain Solak. She did not speak for a long time after I finished. I could hear the ship around us in that silence, the low hum of the drive core running on reserves. A frequency that was slightly wrong, slightly too high, the hum of a system under more stress than it was built to hold. I could hear the faint whisper of the atmospheric recyclers working harder than usual, because we were down a compartment to vacuum and the system was compensating. I could hear faintly the sound of someone moving in the corridor outside the comms bay, and I did not know who it was, but the footsteps had the careful, measured pace of someone who was afraid to make sudden movements. The way people walk when the ship they are on might not be entirely sound. 6 hours, 14 minutes, the captain said. Finally. Yes, sir. And the drive core. Medical officers estimate at current thermal progression rate is approximately 4 hours before we cross the threshold, possibly 4.5. Another silence. The data package not yet received. It was transmitted under separate cover. Given the distance to the Earth station, I'd estimate. I checked the sector registry for the post's coordinates. Ran the calculation. Approximately 9 minutes. We have 4 hours before the core crosses. Yes, sir. And the reach station is 6 hours out. Yes, sir. Then we're using the data package, she said. It was not a question. Yes, sir. Get Hassel up. Get him to the drive bay. The moment that package arrives, I want him reading it. Yes, sir. I was already opening the channel to Engineering Chief Hassel Oren before she finished the sentence. Hassel Oren had been awake since the collision. He had been in the drive bay for most of the 2 hours since, and when I reached him he was standing at the main containment panel, with a thermal reader in one hand, and an expression on his face that I can only describe as the specific expression of a person who is looking at a problem they understand completely and cannot fix with anything they currently have available. It is a very particular face. I had seen it twice before in 6 years on the rail, both times in emergencies, and both times it had preceded outcomes that were not good. I told him about the data package. He did not say anything at first. I heard him breathe. Then he said, "Earth." "Yes, sir, they have a file on this failure mode." "They say they do, sir." 31 years old. "A vessel called the Caro's Landing in this corridor." Another breath. "What kind of ship was the Caro's Landing?" I checked. "Long-haul freighter, sir." "Earth registry. Drive course specifications are." I checked again. "Similar to ours but not identical. Containment array used a 3-coil configuration. Ours uses 4. 4-coil system is newer, but the physics are the same. Him move. Footsteps. Something set down on a surface. The bypass procedure. Did they describe it?" "Only the summary, sir. They said it arrests thermal progression by bypassing the secondary magnetic containment array and running the field directly through the primary coil at reduced power. They said it holds the core stable. For how long? 11 hours in their case." A pause. I could hear him thinking. 11 hours from a 3-coil system, he said. 4-coil system, same procedure. We might get more. We might get 8. Depends on how far the fracture has propagated in our housing. He paused again. Problem is the bypass requires isolating 2 of the 4 coils while keeping the primary live. If you do it wrong, you don't arrest the thermal runaway. You accelerate it. The timing has to be exact. Another pause. "Tell me the package has timing specifications." "I'll tell you in 9 minutes, sir." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Fair enough. The data package arrived at 0327. I will tell you what it looked like, because it is relevant. It was large. Not large in the sense of file size, though the file size was substantial. Technical documentation tends to be. It was large in the sense that when I opened the index had 47 sections. Section 1 was the incident report for the Caro's Landing emergency, filed by her captain 3 days after the event, running to 12 pages of dense technical prose. Section 2 was the engineering chief's own report, filed separately, also 12 pages. Section 3 was the formal accident investigation, filed by Earth's Transport Safety Authority, 31 pages. Section 4 was the drive core telemetry record, raw data, 31 hours of logged readings, from the moment of impact to the moment the reach relief vessel had taken them under tow. Sections 5 through 14 were component analysis reports. Section 15 was the bypass procedure itself in full, not a summary, not an overview, but the full step-by-step engineering procedure, with timing specifications and tolerances, and a list of the tools required, diagrams. Sections 16 through 47 were variations for different coil configurations, variations for different hull pressures, variations for different degrees of fracture propagation in the field coil housing, indexed by the percentage of housing integrity remaining. There was a section specifically for 4-coil systems. There was a subsection within that section for 4-coil systems, with a compromised secondary housing. They had anticipated that someone else might need this. They had taken what happened to the Caro's Landing, and they had turned it into a reference, document, a manual, a thing you could use even if your ship was not identical to the Caro's Landing. They had done this 31 years ago, and they had kept it. And they had kept their listening post running in a corridor that no longer needed them. And when our distress burst had hit that post by accident, because 2 digits were transposed in a coordinate that no one had caught, they had found the file and sent it. I forwarded the package to Hessel Oren. I sat for a moment with the index open on my screen. 47 sections. I thought about our navigation officer, Ketra Vul, who had typed 272 instead of 227, while the ship was shaking, and the lights were wrong, and the secondary hull was venting. I thought about the automated check that had passed the error because it had compared the coordinate to the source of the error. I thought about the reach relief station at ETA 7, which was presumably still waiting for a distress call from a ship at 44 North, 227 East. That was never going to arrive. I thought about what would have happened if the coordinate had been correct. The reach station would have received the call. The reach station would have dispatched a relief vessel. The relief vessel would have arrived in 6 hours. We had 4 hours. The correct coordinate would have killed us. I did not dwell on this. There was too much else to do. Hassel Oren's voice came over the channel at 0341, 14 minutes after I forwarded the package. Thal, sir, get me the captain. I opened the three-way channel, sir, Hassel said to Captain Solak. I've reviewed the procedure. It's good. It's exactly the right procedure. The timing specifications are in tolerances I can work with. The 4-coil variation is complete. They've even accounted for partial housing fracture, which is what we have. I'd estimate we're at about 60% housing integrity. On the secondary, and they have a table that adjusts the procedure for exactly that scenario. A pause. I can do this. Captain Solak's voice was very even. Walk me through the risk. The risk is in the isolation step. When you isolate coils 2 and 3 and kick the primary to compensate, there's a window of approximately 40 seconds when the system is in a configuration that is inherently unstable. If something goes wrong in that window, if the primary field fluctuates, if there's another microfracture propagation event, take another impact, we lose the core immediately. Another pause. The procedure specifies a stabilization hold before the isolation step. You run the primary at reduced power for 6 minutes before you make the switch. That stabilizes the field geometry. The 40-second window becomes manageable. And if you don't do the procedure, then we have approximately 3 hours and 40 minutes before progression crosses the point of no return. After that, we have maybe an hour before the core fails, a beat. The reach station is 6 hours out of silence. Do it, the captain said. Yes, sir. I need 2 engineers on the housing access panel and 1 at the primary control board, pulling Menace and Sorrel from hull repair, and I need, take whoever you need. Yes, sir. The channel closed. I sat at the comms rail and listened to the ship. I want to be accurate about the next 2 hours because accuracy is the only thing I can offer. I was not in the drive bay. I was at the comms rail, which is where a comms rating belongs during an emergency. On the rail, monitoring, available, ready to be the conduit between the ship and anything outside it. I was not useful in any direct sense during those 2 hours. What I did was sit and monitor and wait. That is harder than it sounds. Waiting is harder than working. It gives you something to do with the part of your mind that wants to run through scenarios, that wants to calculate probabilities and assign weight to outcomes, and decide which outcome it is most afraid of, and then return to that outcome repeatedly, like pressing a bruise. When you are working, the working fills that space. When you are waiting, nothing fills it, and the calculating mind has a great deal of time and nothing to do but calculate. I calculated. I could not stop myself. The drive core's thermal progression rate, before the bypass, had been approximately 1 degree per 8 minutes. That was the figure our engineering board had given us 2 hours earlier, when the emergency was new, and the numbers were still being established. 1 degree per 8 minutes meant, by the time Hassel Oren announced he was ready to begin the stabilization hold, that we had consumed approximately 15 degrees of the margin between our current state and the threshold. The threshold was 40 degrees away from where we had been at the start. 15 degrees consumed, 25 remaining. At 1 degree per 8 minutes, we had approximately 3 hours and 20 minutes of margin left. The reach station was 6 hours out. I calculated this, and then I set it aside and picked up the monitoring routine, which was the work I had to do, and which I did carefully and thoroughly, because careful, thorough work is the correct response to fear. The monitoring routine had 17 steps. I ran all 17. I logged the results. I ran them again. 3 hours and 20 minutes. I ran the routine again. At some point during the second pass, I did not note the exact time. I became aware that I was not the only person sitting still. The bridge had 4 stations besides mine: navigation, tactical, engineering relay, and the captain's chair, which was empty because the captain was in the medical bay. Navigation was occupied by the backup officer, a junior lieutenant named Kossi Merritt, who had been aboard 4 months, and who was, I noted, very carefully not looking at the drive core monitor. Tactical was dark, not manned, which was standard for a non-combat emergency situation. Engineering relay was manned by a rating named Sovol Hennett, who was doing exactly what I was doing, running his monitoring routine and logging his results and not saying anything. None of us spoke. There is a quality to silence on a ship in distress that is different from ordinary silence. Ordinary silence is neutral, the absence of something, a gap between other things. The silence on a damaged ship is a presence. It is the silence of people who are listening, all of them, all at once. Everything the ship is telling them. The hum of the drive core, the sound of the atmospheric recyclers, the occasional tick of the hull, responding to thermal variance, the sound of their own breathing, which they are mostly trying not to hear, because it reminds them that the air they are breathing is finite and the system that replenishes it is running at elevated capacity, and the hull breach is patched but not repaired. We sat in that silence and listened to the ship scream. The drive core's hum had a particular quality to it, and I had been listening to that hum for 6 years, and I knew its variations the way you know the sounds of a place you have lived in for a long time. I knew the slightly high frequency of the emergency reserve mode. I knew the deeper, more authoritative sound it made when it was running at full power. I knew the intermittent fluctuations that meant the containment field was working against something, a gravity gradient, a course correction, a lateral thrust event. At 03:05-07 the hum changed. It dropped. It became lower and quieter than the emergency reserve note. Lower than I had ever heard it. A sound that was almost at the edge of hearing. A sound that felt less like a frequency and more like a presence. I knew from context that this was the stabilization hold. Hassel-Oren running the primary at reduced power, building the stable field geometry, the procedure required before the isolation step. I sat very still and listened to that sound for 6 minutes. 04:03, the hum changed again. It didn't fluctuate, it didn't spike, it shifted. A deliberate, controlled shift, the sound of a system being reconfigured by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. It held the new note for 3 seconds. 4, 5, 10 seconds, 20. At the 40-second mark, I realized I had been holding my breath. I let it out. The drive core's hum was not the emergency reserve note anymore. It was not the full power note. It was something else. Lower than reserve, steadier than reserve. A note I did not have a name for because I had never heard it before. The hum of a drive core running on its primary coil alone, with 2 coils isolated, doing a job it was not designed to do in exactly this configuration, but doing it anyway. At a 4:06, Hassel-Oren's voice came over the all-ship channel. Engineering to bridge. Bypass procedure complete. Drive core is stable. Thermal progression has arrested. We are holding at 64% primary output. Current configuration is sustainable for approximately 9 hours. A pause. We will be ready for reach relief arrival in 6 hours, 2 minutes. I sat at the comms rail with my hands flat on the surface and did not say anything for a moment. Then I opened the channel to the Earth Deep Watch post. The reply time to the ETA corridor station was roughly 9 minutes each way, 18 minutes for a round trip. I composed the message in that window, in the time between when I opened the channel and when I could reasonably expect a response. This was the first message I had ever sent to an Earth station. I was not sure exactly what protocol applied. I had 6 years of experience with ReachCom's protocol, and essentially none with anything else. And the Earth station's first message had been crisp and functional, and had not invited anything other than a functional response. Not sure they wanted more than that. I wrote, "This is comms rating Vesa Thal aboard the Sovereign Reach frigate Okeran's Margin. We have completed the bypass procedure. Drive core is stable. Thermal progression has arrested. We are holding at 64% primary output. Configuration is sustainable. The Reach Relief Station at ETA 7 has confirmed revised ETA of 6 hours, 2 minutes. We will be ready for their arrival." I paused, and then I wrote, "The data package was complete and correct. 4-coil variation matched our system exactly. Engineering Chief Oren implemented the procedure without deviation. Documentation saved this ship." I paused again, and then I wrote, "We did not aim the distress burst at your station. The sector coordinate was transposed in our emergency header during a chaotic period following the collision. We filed for ETA 7. You received it instead." I stopped there and read what I had written. I was not sure why I had included the last paragraph. It was not operationally relevant. The Earth station already knew they had received a misdirected call. They had referenced the interoperability clause that authorized them to respond regardless of the signal's intended recipient, which meant they already understood the situation. Telling them the coordinate was transposed was not new information. But something in me needed to say it clearly. We did not aim it at you. You answered anyway. Those two facts sitting next to each other felt like something that should be acknowledged, even if acknowledgement was not in the protocol. I sent the message. I had 9 minutes to think while I waited. I thought about the Reach's sensor grid, which had expanded significantly in the last century. And the Earth listening posts in the ETA corridor predated that expansion and had never been decommissioned, despite no longer being necessary. I thought about what no longer necessary meant in practice. It meant the posts still ran, still listened, still logged incoming signals, still maintained their interoperability handshakes with the Reach's protocol architecture. It meant that 94 years of dormant infrastructure was sitting in the corridor, waiting for a use that might never come. Except it had come, 2 digits in the wrong order, and it had come. I thought about the 47 sections in the data package. I thought about the engineering team on the Caro's landing, 31 years ago, who had survived their emergency and then gone home and written 12 pages about it. I thought of the safety authority that had investigated and written 30 more, and the technical staff who had taken all of that and built it into a reference document with variations and subsections, and a table for partial housing fracture. I thought about whatever meeting or policy decision or administrative habit had resulted in that document being stored at the ETA corridor post specifically, available for transmission at 18 minutes notice. I did not know if this was intentional or incidental. I did not know if Earth maintained specific documentation at each of its corridor posts, indexed to the known failure modes of vessels that transited those specific corridors, or if this was simply a general archive that happened to include the Caro's Landing's records. Because the Caro's Landing had filed an incident report, and the incident report had gone into a database that the post had access to. I did not know if the person who had compiled the data package had made a deliberate choice to include all 47 sections, or if that was an automated function that assembled everything associated with a given failure mode. I did not know. I added it to the list of things I did not know about Earth, which was a long list. The reply came at 0432. It was shorter than the first message. It ran to 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph said, "Acknowledged. Glad to hear the procedure held. The Caro's Landing incident was well documented. Engineering Chief Tomas Selk filed a thorough report, and we've maintained it in the corridor archive as a reference for exactly this scenario. Chief Oren's implementation of the 4-coil variation is consistent with our modeling. The 9-hour window should be more than sufficient." The second paragraph said, "Regarding the transposition, these things happen. We noted the discrepancy when we received your first and cross-referenced your stated position against both coordinates to confirm the mismatch. We've filed a corrections notice to ETA 7 under Article 11 protocols. They have your accurate position and are en route. No further action required on your end. Safe arrival to your relief." And then it was done. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, specifically the second paragraph. These things happen. I sat with that phrase for a while. It was not dismissive. The context made clear they had done something about it, cross-referenced the positions, and corrected the notice, and notified ETA 7. It was not a gesture of false comfort. It was just a statement. A flat acknowledgement that the coordinate had been wrong, and that wrong coordinates were a thing that occurred, and that when they occurred, the appropriate response was to note the discrepancy, take corrective action, and proceed. No commentary on the error. No suggestion that it should have been caught. No indication that they thought anything unusual had happened beyond the operational sequence of distress received, documentation located, package transmitted, correction filed. I thought about the 47 sections again. I had been thinking about them, in the background. During the 2 hours of waiting, the index had stayed open in a minimized window at the corner of my console. I had not closed it, not consciously decided to leave it open. I had not closed it either. I had looked at it several times during the wait, not reading, just looking at the list of section titles. Incident report, engineering report, safety investigation, drive telemetry, component analyses, the procedure, the variations, the four-coil section, partial housing fracture subsection. What I had been turning over during the wait was a question I did not know how to answer. Was this what they were like? Or was this particular? I had no reference point. The Reach's contact with Earth was operational and intermittent. Trade corridor protocols, transit rights negotiations, the interoperability memoranda that governed things like the deep watch posts. It was not, per my experience, or in anyone's experience, that I knew personally, the kind of contact that gave you a clear picture of another civilization's institutional habits. The Reach knew what Earth did at the negotiating table and in the transit lanes. The Reach did not, as a practical matter, know what Earth did when a distress burst arrived from the wrong species by accident on a dormant frequency. Now I had one data point. They had replied in 9 minutes. They had sent 47 sections, filed a correction notice, and notified the station that was supposed receive the call, and forwarded the corrected position without being asked. They had done all of this under the authority of a 94-year-old memorandum that obligated them only to acknowledge receipt. One data point. I did not know if this was characteristic. I did not know if the 9 minutes was a function of their watch protocols or a function of the specific person who had been on watch. I did not know if the 47 sections was standard documentation practice or an exceptional choice. I did not know if these things happen was a cultural posture or a personal one. I had one data point, and the one data point had saved 340 lives, and I was aware, as I sat at the comms rail reading their message, that this awareness was shaping how I was reading it. I was reading it generously. I was reading it the way you read things when the person who wrote them has just done something that you cannot repay, and that they did not ask to be thanked for, and that they seem to regard as simply the appropriate function of a system they maintain. That is probably not a fully objective reading, but I read it 3 times, and the third time I read it, I thought, this is what it looks like when a species builds its infrastructure with the assumption that someone outside the intended use case might need it. They had built the post for the corridor. They had built the archive for their own ships. Somewhere along the way, post and the archive had become something that could be used by anyone who arrived at the right frequency at the wrong time, or the wrong frequency at the right time, depending on how you counted. They had not planned that. Or if they had, the plan was so old and so embedded in the institutional practice of maintaining things that it no longer looked like a plan. It looked like a habit. The habit of keeping things running past their apparent need. The habit of documenting thoroughly enough that the documentation transferred. The habit of sending more than asked for. These things happen, and when they happen, here are 47 sections. They had not said that. I was paraphrasing. But that was as best I could reconstruct it, the text behind the text. I sat with all of that for a moment. Then I went back to monitoring the comms rail. Captain Solak came off medical hold at 0611, 3 hours before the Reach relief station arrived. She came to the bridge on her own, which the medic had advised against, and which the captain had apparently decided was advice and not an order. Left arm was in a pressure wrap. She moved carefully, but she moved, and she sat in her chair with the deliberate economy of someone conserving effort because effort was a resource that was currently limited. She did not go through the logs immediately. She sat for a moment in her chair and looked at the drive core readings on the panel in front of her. The stable, lower than usual hum, the 64% primary output, the thermal progression line that had been flat for 3 hours. Hassels, she said. Hassel-Oren's voice came back from engineering. Sir, this is your work. It's the procedure from the package, sir. I followed it. Your work, she said again, and closed the channel. She pulled the comms log then. I watched her read it from across the bridge. She went through the initial distress transmission, the coordinate in the header, the origin flag on the reply burst, the sector registry entry for Earth Deep Watch Post Eta Corridor. She went through both of Earth's mesosneas. She went through the data package index. She sat with the index open for a long time, scrolling through the 47 sections. When she had finished, she sat back. Sir, final message to the Earth station. Yes, sir. The line about the coordinate, you told them we didn't aim the burst at them. Yes, sir. Pause. I was not certain whether this was going to be a reprimand or something else. Good, she said. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the drive core readings again. Then she said, more to the panel than to me. They kept the post running for 94 years. Yes, sir. After the corridor was covered. Yes, sir. Why? It was not exactly a question directed at me. I answered it anyway. I don't know, sir. The interoperability memorandum requires them to maintain the post, but the memorandum is 94 years old, and those things are renegotiated. Someone kept renewing it, or no one got around to closing it down, or I paused. Or they maintained it because a corridor post, with 94 years of incident documentation, and a working transmitter costs less to maintain than it does to rebuild if you decide you need it again. She was quiet. Any of those could be true, I added. I don't know which one it is. Neither do I, she said. She looked at the panel. Add a note to the incident report, all of it. The coordinate, the Earth station, data package. I want the full account in the record. Yes, sir. And get me the registry entry for the ETA corridor interoperability. Memorandum. Article 11, Section 4. I want to know who currently holds this assignatory renewal authority on the reach side. I pulled it. I read her the name. She nodded once. She did not say what she intended to do with that name. I did not ask. The Reach Relief Station's advance vessel arrived at 8:08:47, 6 hours and 5 minutes after Earth's corrected notification had reached ETA 7. It was a light tender with a 3-person engineering team, running ahead of the main relief ship by about 40 minutes. And when its comms officer hailed us, the first thing she said was that they had received an unusual notification from an Earth Deep Watch post, and we explained what had happened. I explained what had happened. There was a silence on the channel that I recognized. It was the same silence I had sat in at 0314 when I had first run the origin flag through the lookup table. The silence of someone absorbing a fact that does not fit the categories they had prepared for. Earth, the tender's comms officer said. Deep Watch post ETA corridor. Yes. They had documentation for our failure mode. From a vessel called the Caro's Landing, 31 years ago. Another silence. And you implemented the procedure. Engineering Chief Hassel Oren implemented it. It held. We've been stable for 5.5 hours. Understood. A pause. We'll send our engineering team across to assess anyway. Just 2. Understood, I said. We'll be ready to receive them. The channel closed. I heard distantly some conversation on the tender's end before the channel fully cleared. Not words, just the murmur of people processing something unexpected. I did not try to make out what they were saying. The main relief ship arrived at 0927. Its team assessed the drive core, confirmed that the bypass was stable, and recommended we maintain it for the transit to the nearest deep maintenance facility rather than attempt a return to standard configuration at this stage. This was consistent with the data package's recommendations for the transit period following a successful bypass. Hassel Oren had already told me the same thing. The hull breach in the secondary compartment was patched. The pressure seal on Deck 2 was rebuilt. The 2 crew members who had sustained injuries in the collision, both minor, both ambulatory, were assessed by the relief ship's medic and cleared. At 10:43, the relief ship's senior officer certified the O'Karen's margin as fit to transit under escort. The escort was 1 light corvette and the relief ship itself, which was more than we needed, but the Reach's relief protocols for a drive core compromised frigate specified a 2-vessel escort, and the protocols were the protocols. I was not unhappy about the 2-vessel escort. Before we left the position, I sent a final message to Earth Deep Watch Post ETA corridor. I had not been instructed to do this. Captain Solak had not asked me to, and had not said I shouldn't. I did it, because it seemed like something that should be done, and because I was the one who had been on the comms rail for the entire event, 'cause the event had been. I was struggling then to find the right word for what the event had been, and I am still struggling now when I try to write this account. The message said, "This is comms rating Vesa Thal, O'Karen's margin. Relief has arrived and we are preparing to transit under escort." Full crew complement intact. Drive core holding stable at 64% primary output. Estimated arrival at ETA station for deep maintenance, 31 hours. I paused for a long time. Then I wrote, "We will not be the last vessel to file an incorrect coordinate in this corridor. Host will hear from someone else who didn't mean to reach you." I wanted to say, before we transit, 47 sections were the right number of sections. Whoever decided to build the reference document that way made the right call. I sent it. We were already turning to the transit heading when the reply came back. It was one sentence. It said, "Noted. Safe transit. The incident report runs to 23 pages." I wrote 11 of them. Hassel Oren wrote 6, covering the engineering response in full. Navigation Officer Ketra Voss wrote 3, covering the coordinate transposition and the failure of the pre-send check, and she wrote this with a precision that as the writing of someone who understands what happened and is not trying to soften it or explain it away. She wrote what happened. She included a recommendation for a secondary check protocol that compares the filed coordinate to the sector registry rather than to the vessel's own position log. Captain Solak reviewed the full report and appended 2 pages. The second page was a recommendation, addressed to the Reach's Outer Corridor Authority, regarding the ongoing maintenance of Earth's deep watch infrastructure in the ETA corridor. It did not say thank you. That would have been outside the procedural register of a formal incident report addendum. What it said was that the event documented in the preceding pages had revealed an operational gap in the Reach's own relief coverage that had existed in the ETA corridor for an indeterminate period, that this gap had been partially compensated by Earth's maintained infrastructure under the terms of the ETA Corridor Interoperability Memorandum, and that the authority should consider, in the context of the upcoming memorandum renewal cycle, whether the Reach had an operational interest in the continued maintenance of Earth's post. She had also attached to this recommendation a copy of the data package Earth had transmitted, all 47 sections. The report was filed at 1400, before we reached ETA Station. I am writing this account separately, apart from the incident report, because an incident report is a document of record, and a document of record has a specific grammar. It describes what happened and what should be done about what happened, and it does not have room for the other things. The things that are not in the incident report. Here is what is not in the incident report. At 0327, when I opened the index to the data package and counted 47 sections, I felt something that I did not know how to categorize. It was not relief, though relief came later when the bypass held. It was not gratitude, though I suppose gratitude is the right word for some of what I felt across that day. It was something more specific. It was the feeling of looking at a thing that was built with more care than the situation obviously required, and understanding that the extra care was deliberate. 47 sections in is not an accident. Reference document with variations indexed to different coil configurations and different degrees of housing fracture is not something that happens by default. Someone, 31 years ago, or at some point between then and now, looked at the Caro's landing incident and thought, this could happen again, but it might not happen in the same way, and whoever it happens to might not have the same ship, and the documentation should work for them too. They built it to be transferable. They did not know who would need it. They did not know it would be an alien frigate with a 4-coil drive system in a corridor that Earth had no current operational stake in. They built it anyway, or they built it for themselves, and it happened to transfer, which amounts to the same thing in terms of what we received, and the 9 minutes. 18 minutes round trip to the Earth post, but only 9 minutes for their outbound message. They had composed and transmitted a reply within 9 minutes of receiving a distress burst from a species they were not obligated to respond to, using a 94-year-old interoperability clause that entitled them only to acknowledge receipt, and they had used those 9 minutes not merely to acknowledge receipt but to locate the most relevant documentation in their archive and prepare to transmit it. 9 minutes. I have spent a great deal of time since then thinking about what their 9 minutes looked like on the other end. Someone on watch at the post, the distress burst arriving on the receiver, the header resolving to a reach vessel in an emergency state. Check against the interoperability memorandum. Yes, we can respond. A quick query to the archive. Drive core emergency. Thermal runaway. Field coil housing fracture. A result coming back. The Caro's landing. 31 years old but intact, documented, indexed. Someone deciding to send not just an acknowledgement, but the whole 47 section. 9 minutes. I do not know who that person was. I did not ask. The messages were not signed by an individual. They were signed by the station. I have thought about asking, in a follow-up message, whether I could have a name. I have not sent that message. I am not sure it is appropriate or that it serves any operational purpose. I have thought about it. The thing I keep coming back to is the coordinate. I have been a comms rating for 6 years and I have processed thousands of transmissions, and I have caught coordinate errors before, including a few in emergency headers, because coordinates in emergency headers are the kind of thing you check twice and then check once more. I had checked the coordinate in our outgoing burst at 252. I had compared it to the position log. I had passed it. The position log was wrong. The automated check had compared the coordinate to the source of the error. Both were 44 north, 272 east, corridor 9, and they matched. The check passed, and the burst went to the wrong place. I have been a comms rating for 6 years, and I caught the error only after the reply came in. After I looked at the reply and recognized that it should not exist, and started working backward through the chain of events to find the failure, I found the coordinate, I found the transposition, I found the precise mechanism by which a check that was supposed to prevent this kind of error had instead confirmed it. If I had caught it before the burst went out, we would have retransmitted to ETA 7. The reach station would have received the distress call. The reach station would have dispatched a relief vessel. The relief vessel would have arrived in 6 hours. We had 4 hours. I did not catch it in time to prevent the wrong transmission. The automated check did not catch it. The correct check would have saved us from the error, and the error would have killed us. I have thought about this more than I should, probably. I have thought about whether there is a useful lesson in it beyond the obvious one. The obvious lesson being that Keitra Voss has already identified and recommended a better check protocol. The obvious lesson is being addressed. That is what a check protocol is for. But the other thing, the thing underneath the obvious lesson, I don't know what to do with that. The idea that we filed to the wrong place, and the wrong place had what we needed, and the right place would have arrived too late. The idea that 2 digits in the wrong order, typed by a navigator under duress in a ship that was coming apart, routed our call to the one location in the corridor that had a 31-year-old file that matched our failure mode exactly. I am not, by nature, a person who believes that things happen for reasons. I have worked on the comms rail for 6 years, and what the comms rail teaches you, more than anything else, is that signals go where the physics says they will go, and sometimes the physics is working in your favor, and sometimes it is not, and the job is to understand the physics well enough to make good decisions, and then make those decisions and accept the outcomes. The coordinate transposition was a human error compounded by a check protocol failure. The Earth post's 94 years of operation was an administrative and institutional fact. The 47 sections in the data package were the product of deliberate documentation practice. None of these things were miraculous. None of them required explanation beyond their proximate causes. But I keep coming back to the coordinate anyway, to the 2 digits sitting in the wrong order in the emergency header, and what they sent us toward, and what was there when we arrived. And O'Karen's margin reached ESA station at 31 hours. After we began the transit, the deep maintenance team took custody of the drive core immediately, and the bypass was held in place for another 18 hours while they assessed the housing fracture and prepared for the full repair. The fracture had propagated slightly during the transit, about 4%, which was in the expected range for a drive core under the bypass configuration. It did not affect the repair timeline. Captain Solak was in the station medic's bay for most of those 31 hours, properly assessed for the injuries she had sustained in the collision, and which she had, in the characteristic fashion of people who command damaged warships, not fully disclosed to the ship's medic during the crisis phase. Nothing was severe. Nothing required intervention beyond what the pressure wrap had already provided. She was released with instructions. Hassel Oren filed his engineering report and then, from what I heard, slept for 12 hours in a row, which was the most consecutive sleep any of us had gotten since before the collision. I filed the comms report, which was incorporated into the larger incident report, and then I sat in the crew commons and drank something warm and read back through the messages from the Earth station. I had saved them to a personal log file, which is not standard practice, and which I had not consciously decided to do, which I had apparently done at some point during the night while the bypass was holding and the Reach Relief Station was still hours out. 2 messages from the Earth station and my 2 messages to them. 4 messages total. 412 words roughly between us. 412 words and 47 sections and 340 crew. I read them in the crew commons, and then I closed the log and put my terminal away and sat with warm drink for a while, not thinking about anything in particular, which was a thing I had not had time to do in about 36 hours, and which I had apparently needed more than I realized. The Signatory Renewal Authority for the ETA Corridor Interoperability Memorandum on the Reach side was a senior administrator at the Outer Corridor Authority, whose name I am not going to record here, because it is not mine to record. What I will say is that Captain Solak did in fact contact that administrator after we reached ETA Station, and after she was released from the medic's bay, and after she had reviewed the full 23 pages of the incident report. I was not party to that communication. I learned about it afterward, from Hassel Oren, who had learned about it from the captain's aide. What I was told was that the captain had requested a meeting, and the meeting had taken place, and at the end of the meeting the administrator had indicated that the renewal recommendation for the ETA Corridor Interoperability Memorandum would include a provision explicitly maintaining Earth's Deep Watch Post at current operational capacity for the subsequent renewal period. The renewal period is 25 years. I also heard, though I cannot confirm this because I was not present, that the captain had brought the incident report to the meeting, specifically the 23 pages and the attached 47 sections, and that she had placed them on the table in front of the administrator, without saying anything, and had let the administrator read the relevant portions, and that the conversation after that had been shorter than it might otherwise have been. I think about that meeting sometimes. About the 47 sections on mobile. The last thing I will say is this. I do not know what the Earth Deep Watch Post looks like. I know its coordinates 44 north, 272 east, corridor 9, and I know its designation and its interoperability authorization. And I know that its transmitter has a range sufficient to reach us at our emergency position, and that its archive system is organized in a way that allows rapid retrieval of relevant documentation. I know that it is staffed. Someone was on watch at 0254 and composed a reply by 0303 and transmitted it by 306. I know it has been operating for 94 years. I do not know how many people staff it. I do not know what their rotation looks like or what they do during the long stretches when no distress burst arrives. I do not know whether they know in any general sense that their post has ever been used, that in 94 years of operation, any of the signals they have received and logged and responded to have mattered in the specific way that a distress call responded to in time matters. I know that one did. I know that one did, and they know it too, because I told them. I wrote, 47 sections were the right number of sections, and I sent it, and they replied, noted, safe transit. And then they went back to monitoring their receiver in their post at 44 north, 272 east, corridor 9, which was and is and has been for 94 years in a corridor that no longer needs them. Except when it does. I keep the coordinate in a personal file now. Not because I am likely to misfile a distress burst to it intentionally. That would miss the point entirely. And also the point of a deep watch post is that it listens, not that you aim things at it. I keep it because it is a specific location, real place, staffed by real people with a 94-year archive and a working transmitter, and an apparent policy of sending 47 sections when one would have seemed like enough. I keep it because knowing where a thing is seems, to me, The appropriate response to learning that the thing exists. Someday the coordinate may matter again. Not to me, probably, and not in the same way. The Reach's relief coverage in the ETA corridor is being reassessed as part of the incident review. If the assessment goes as I think it will go, the gap that allowed a misdirected distress burst to be the fastest available response to our emergency will be closed. The correct coordinate will reach the correct station, and the correct station will respond in time, and the Earth post will go back to listening to a corridor that does not need it. Which is fine. That is the right outcome. That is what the incident review is for. But I keep the coordinate 44 north, 272 east, corridor 9. 2 digits in the wrong order, and what was at the end of them.